The old internet has always fascinated me, not the slick, polished networks we wander through today, but the wild, half-broken landscape that came before. Those early years felt like an uncharted frontier, a place where every link was a door to something strange, ephemeral, or unexpectedly profound. Back then, no one knew what the rules were yet, and even fewer cared. Anonymous message boards hummed with feverish energy, pixelated graphics blinked like neon signs in a digital alleyway, and eerie stories drifted through forums as if they had minds of their own. It was less a tool and more a living organism, pulsing, muttering, evolving while no one was looking. Maybe that's why I keep going back to it. Those archived pages, frozen screenshots, and forgotten blogs that feel like fossils from another world. People today scroll endlessly, but there was a time when a single website felt like an expedition, when clicking a blue hyperlink felt like pushing aside vines in a dark jungle. Information wasn't spoon-fed by algorithms. You hunted for it. You risked broken pages, strange pop-ups, and the occasional sense that the screen itself was watching you. And buried in all of that chaos were stories, hundreds of them, modern folklore typed by insomniacs at 2 in the morning, passed around and reshaped until no one remembered who wrote them first. Urban legends, creepypastas, digital campfire tailies, whatever you want to call them, they were the heartbeat of the early internet. And they weren't just stories. They were warnings, rituals, dares. Copy and paste this or else. Forward this to 7 people. Watch this video alone. They pretended to be games, but beneath the surface was something else. A reminder that we were willingly stepping into a world built on the unknown. Even now, decades later, I can feel that sensation when I uncover an old file or stumble across a half-erased forum thread. It's like opening a dusty attic box only to find footprints inside. The old internet had textures, grainy images, jagged fonts, glitchy audio files that sounded like they'd been recorded in an abandoned basement. But what really stands out when I look back is how raw the creativity was. People weren't writing for likes or views. They wrote because they felt compelled to, because the glow of the monitor at midnight whispered that someone out there was listening. And sometimes, that whisper felt too real. Lately, I've been digging deeper, looking for the origins of certain stories that still cling to the corners of the web like cobwebs. Most of them lead nowhere: dead domains, archived text with missing images, usernames that clearly never belonged to real people. But every now and then, I stumble on something that feels different. Something that wasn't meant to survive this long, but somehow did. Something that seems almost self-preserving. I think that's what drew me to this project, to the idea of revisiting an old story and tracing its roots. Not the sanitized versions people retell today, but the raw form, the way it lived when the internet was murky and lawless. People assume those stories were harmless, just digital folklore crafted by bored teenagers. But if you've spent enough nights combing through old net archives, you start noticing patterns, recurring motifs, names showing up years apart in places they shouldn't be, timestamps that don't line up with any logical explanation. And sometimes, you find things that shouldn't still be active. Comments posted long after the site was abandoned. Email links that still respond. Videos that were supposedly removed but continue reappearing under different file names. It's enough to make you wonder whether the early architects of digital myths accidentally opened doors they couldn't close, or whether the stories themselves found ways to keep walking through. I don't believe every ghost tale floating around the web, but I do believe in resonance. I believe certain stories leave impressions, like fingerprints, and those impressions cling to every archive, mirror, or forgotten folder they touch. And the deeper I dig into these legends, the more I feel that something is digging back, nudging me toward the source, urging me to remember what the early web really was. Not harmless, not random, but alive in its own strange way. It's strange, thinking back on it now, how simple my life used to be before everything tilted sideways. People always say that childhood friendships are supposed to last forever, that the people you laugh with in those early years are the same ones you'll be leaning on decades later. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I do know it definitely didn't work out for me. I had friends once, real ones. People I sat with at lunch, traded inside jokes with, texted late at night about the dumbest possible things. It wasn't some perfect fairy tale group, but it felt solid in the way that matters when you're young. But after the accident, all of that cracked apart like thin ice under too much weight. I don't blame them, not completely. Fear makes people do unpredictable things. It pulls them away from whoever reminds them of the moment everything went wrong. I've told myself that 1,000 times, that I shouldn't take it personally, that things changed too quickly for anyone to keep up. I repeat those excuses in my head like a mantra, yet every time I walk through a crowded hallway and hear whispers snap shut the moment I look over, I feel that familiar pinch in my chest. People avoid what they don't understand. And right now, that includes me. The funny part is, the accident wasn't even about my friends. They weren't involved. Not directly. It was just me and those 3 girls. Girls I barely knew. Girls who definitely weren't my friends and who never imagined they'd be connected to me in any way. Before that day, I probably couldn't have told you anything about them besides their names and maybe 1 or 2 superficial details. They occupied a different orbit, one I never planned to cross. It's strange how quickly a single moment can fuse unrelated lives together, whether you want it or not. In the days afterward, the whole school felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to say something official, something reassuring, something normal. But normal had already slipped out the back door, and none of us knew how to call it back. The 3 girls changed first. I don't mean physically or in some dramatic cinematic way, just mentally. Emotionally. They withdrew, started acting skittish and jumpy, glancing over their shoulders like they expected something to be following them. Their friends kept asking what was wrong, but they either said nothing or gave the same vague answers that convinced no one. And me, I wasn't much better. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. My thoughts wouldn't stay still long enough for me to sort them into anything coherent. Every little noise made me jerk like someone had cracked a whip beside my ear. People said I looked pale, exhausted, hollowed out. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to. Whatever the accident had done to those girls' minds, it was doing variations of the same thing to mine. Not identical, but close enough that I understood why everyone else began keeping their distance. No one wanted to be pulled into whatever shadow we'd stumbled into. Since then, I've learned to keep to myself. It's easier that way, quieter, cleaner, less complicated. I go through the motions. I pretend I don't notice the way conversations dim when I enter a room, or the way teachers glance at me like they're waiting for something to snap. Most days I can almost convince myself I'm fine. Almost. But then I catch my reflection unexpectedly, or pass by the wing of the school where it happened, and the memory rises up like a submerged object brushing the bottom of a boat. I guess that's why I'm finally telling this story, because I'm tired of carrying it alone, and because if anyone is ever going to understand why things changed, why we changed, I have to start at the beginning. So here it is. 2 days before the incident, everything still felt normal, or at least as normal as my life ever felt back then. It was a Wednesday, the kind of day that sits quietly in the middle of the week without any intention of standing out. Classes were dull, the halls smelled like disinfectant and cheap cafeteria pizza, and the sky outside had that gray, undecided look that made it impossible to tell whether it wanted to rain or just sulk. Nothing in the air hinted at what was coming. If anything, that day felt painfully ordinary. I was sitting on the old bench outside the computer lab, tapping my foot against the tile floor as I waited for Carmen Winstead. She had promised to meet me before lunch, promised being a flexible word where she was involved. Carmen was never in a hurry. She moved at her own rhythm, drifting from one thing to the next like she was following a tune only she could hear. I peeked through the narrow window in the lab door. Sure enough, she was still glued to the nearest computer, shoulders hunched, her messy black ponytail bouncing every time she laughed to herself. She was typing furiously, the blue glow of the monitor washing over her face. Even from out in the hallway, I could already guess what she was doing. Chainmail, freaking people out, her favorite pastime. Most chainmail was stupid. Badly written threats about ghosts haunting your email inbox or curses that would supposedly strike you if you didn't forward the message to 10 people in the next 5 minutes. Carmen didn't live for the content. She lived for the reactions, for the way people freaked out even when they pretended they were too mature to believe in that stuff anymore. She'd always grin the moment someone whispered, "Did you get that weird message?" "Yeah," that was her doing. I knocked on the door lightly, not wanting to startle her. She spun around anyway, eyes wide, mouse still in her hand like she'd been caught doing something illegal. Then she realized it was just me and relaxed with a lopsided smile. "Hold on," she called through the glass. "Just one more." One more usually meant 5 or 6 more, but I didn't mind waiting. It was just Carmen. She wasn't the smartest kid in school, but she wasn't anywhere near the dumbest either. She sat perfectly in the middle, never enough to get noticed, never enough to get praised. Teachers rarely remembered her name unless she did something that forced them to look her way, which she didn't often do. She lived quietly, almost invisibly, unless she decided otherwise. And honestly, that was how she liked it. Carmen had the kind of life no kid should have to navigate alone, but somehow she did. Her dad left when she was 3, not in the tragic, heartbreaking way where you never stop hoping they come back, but in the blunt, hollow way where they pack a bag, walk out the door, and simply never return. No explanation, no apology, just absence. Her mom worked late hours, sometimes through the night, juggling 2 jobs that barely kept the lights on. She wanted to be there for Carmen, wanted to attend her school events and help with homework, and be the kind of mom you see in commercials. But life had anchored her to survival instead. She loved Carmen deeply, but love doesn't erase exhaustion, and exhaustion doesn't pause just because your kid needs you. So Carmen learned early how to be her own company. And then there was her brother. I had only heard the story once from her, and only because she was half asleep during an overnight school trip and probably forgot she even told me. He died in a car accident years ago before I ever met her. She spoke about him like someone remembering an old photograph they could never hold again. Soft, distant, aching, but resigned. I never pushed for more. I didn't need the details to understand what it did to her family. Losing someone changes the air in a house, shifts its weight. You can feel the empty room, even with the door closed. Carmen carried all of that quietly, tucked under her jokes and chainmails and fake scolding when I arrived late to meet her. The world had been unkind to her, but she refused to let it swallow her whole. She filled the cracks with mischief, weird humor, and her stubborn refusal to disappear. Finally, she pushed her chair back and hurried toward the door, shoving her notebook into her backpack as she walked. When she stepped out into the hallway, she was full of triumphant energy. "Okay," she said, closing the door behind her. "I just sent the perfect one. People are gonna freak out." I raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? "No, probably," she shrugged. "Depends if your inbox is cursed now." She said it so casually, like sending digital threats was just another part of PE class. I laughed, shaking my head as we started walking down the hall together. That was the thing about Carmen. She made even the mundane feel like a strange little adventure. When she was around, I felt less like a quiet, overlooked nobody and more like someone who had a place in the world. That feeling mattered more than she ever realized. We walked slowly, letting the tide of students rush past us, neither of us in a hurry to get to lunch. She talked about a show she'd been watching, one she insisted I needed to catch up on, while I teased her about scaring half the school with her chainmail streak. Everything about that moment was simple, familiar, safe. If I had known it was one of the last moments like that, one of the last times we'd walk together without fear twisting our stomachs, I might have tried to hold on to it a little longer. Maybe we both would have. But 2 days before the incident, we were just kids in a hallway, laughing like nothing could ever go wrong. And now it's time to talk about how everything began to unravel. It starts later that afternoon, with something small, something easy to overlook, something that should have meant nothing at all, but didn't. Carmen and I were only halfway down the science wing when the noise of laughter drifted around the corner, sharp, bright, unmistakably rehearsed. It was the kind of laugh people practiced in mirrors, the kind that only existed when an audience was close enough to hear it. Carmen slowed, rolling her eyes before I even needed to. We both knew who was waiting at the bend in the hallway. The 3 most popular girls in school. You couldn't go a single day without hearing their names. They moved through hallways like they owned the building, their footsteps light, their voices loud, their confidence ironclad. Most people didn't really like them, but almost everyone pretended to. Popularity worked like gravity. Once something had enough attention, people just kept orbiting it whether they wanted to or not. Leading the trio was Brielle Donovan, the queen bee in every sense of the word. Her hair was always curled to absolute perfection, her nails freshly done every week, and her backpack probably cost more than my mom's car. Brielle had grown up on a steady diet of privilege, private dance lessons, designer clothes, an allowance more generous than most adults' paychecks. Her parents spoiled her into a shape only money could carve, polished on the outside, brittle underneath. She had 2 older sisters who were just as glamorous, each one carving her own reputation in local pageants and social circles. In the Donovan home, attention was a currency, and Brielle learned early how to demand more of it than anyone else. Next to her was Alyssa Porter, slightly shorter, always smiling, always pretending to be sweet. Of the 3, she was the one adults loved the most. She could flip a switch and turn polite and innocent in an instant. But the moment no teacher was in sight, that smile sharpened into something meaner. Alyssa came from the kind of family where success was measured in trophies and Instagram followers. Her parents practically ran her life like a brand campaign. Dance recitals, tennis practice, photo shoots for the local kids' clothing boutique her mom owned. Every moment of Alyssa's childhood was scheduled, polished, and public. It made her needy for approval, desperate for attention, and painfully sensitive to anyone who didn't treat her like royalty. The third was Maddie Clark, taller than the others and by far the loudest. Maddie had grown up spoiled in the most chaotic way. Her parents were wealthy but completely hands-off, more interested in their careers than their daughter's actual upbringing. She had freedom without guidance, money without boundaries. That combination made her reckless. She wasn't as calculating as Brielle or as image-obsessed as Alyssa, but she followed their lead without question, like a shadow that had learned how to talk back. Maddie craved belonging so much that she would do anything to stay in the group, even when anything meant crossing lines most people wouldn't dare approach. Together, they made a perfect storm: status, manipulation, and sheer volume, and they knew it. As Carmen and I approached, their laughter pealed louder, the kind that instantly put me on edge. Carmen nudged me lightly with her elbow. "Prepare yourself," she muttered, barely moving her lips. "The circus is in town." I suppressed a smile. Carmen always had something to say about them, not loud enough to get caught, but just loud enough for me to hear. She never feared them, not really. Maybe it was because she had dealt with scarier things at home, or maybe she just didn't have the energy to care about whatever drama they were stirring up on any given day. We rounded the corner, and there they were, leaning against the wall as if posing for a magazine shoot. Brielle spotted us first, her eyes narrowing slightly before she replaced her expression with a sugary sweet smile. "Well, if it isn't the computer lab gremlins," she said. "Working on another one of your spooky emails, Carmen." Carmen didn't slow, didn't stiffen, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She just shrugged. "Maybe," she said. "Want to be on the mailing list." Alyssa snorted. Maddie cringed dramatically, like the idea physically pained her. "No thanks," Brielle said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "We don't do creepy." "Could have fooled me," Carmen muttered under her breath. I bit back a laugh as we walked past them. Brielle's smile twitched downward just a little. Carmen had that effect on her. She never played by their unspoken rules. She never bowed her head, never got flustered, never let their carefully constructed hierarchy affect her. And that made them furious. As we continued down the hall toward the gym, I glanced back and saw the 3 girls still watching us. Their expressions weren't amused anymore. They looked irritated, like Carmen had stolen a spotlight they didn't want to share. At the time, I brushed it off. Just another hallway moment. Just another run-in. Just another day where they acted superior and Carmen refused to care. I didn't know yet how important that moment would be. How those 3 girls, laughing, spoiled, and untouchable, would soon become tangled in something none of them were prepared for. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. 2 days before the incident, the pieces were already shifting into place. We just didn't know it yet. We were so close to the gym doors, just a few steps away, when I heard footsteps behind us. Fast ones, purposeful ones. I didn't have to turn around to know who they belonged to. Carmen stiffened beside me, shoulders drawing tighter like she'd felt a cold gust of air run down her back. Brielle's voice, light and poisoned, floated after us. Wait, hold on. I have a question. Carmen stopped walking, mostly out of annoyance. I stopped with her, even though my stomach already felt uneasy. This wasn't the usual teasing tone. This was the tone Brielle used when she had something planned. She approached with Alyssa and Maddie flanking her like a pair of decorative guard dogs. All three of them wore that same smirking expression, the one that said they already assumed they won whatever game they were about to play. Yes, Carmen asked, voice flat, uninterested. Brielle tapped her chin dramatically. I was just wondering, did you pick out that outfit in the dark? Alyssa giggled immediately, way too loudly. Maddie covered her mouth but didn't bother hiding her snort. I looked at Carmen's outfit. A faded hoodie, jeans with fraying pockets, old sneakers. Nothing special, nothing wrong, just simple. Carmen never dressed to impress. She didn't have the money for it, and honestly, she didn't care. But Brielle wasn't finished. It's cute in like a thrift store kind of way, she continued, tilting her head. Very retro poor girl chic. My jaw tightened. Carmen's hands curled into fists at her sides. Alyssa chimed in. Maybe she just can't tell what matches. You know, since she's always stuck in the computer lab instead of learning how to dress like a normal girl. Maddie added, or maybe she's just too busy writing those creepy emails to bother having taste. Then Alyssa leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it clear the next line was meant to hurt. I mean, it's not like anyone taught her these things. Right, when your mom's never home. That was the first crack. I saw it happen. Carmen's expression froze, not angry, not blank, but something in between, something fragile. I took a step forward. Okay, you made your joke, you can go now. Oh, he's defending her, Brielle said mockingly, drawing out the words. How sweet. I glared, but she wasn't done. And honestly, she continued, with the brain she's got, she should probably focus more on school anyway. What was the last thing she failed? English? Math? Oh wait, wasn't it both? Carmen's face turned red, not from embarrassment, but from the heat of pain she was trying desperately not to show. And then Brielle went too far. Maybe her dad figured it out early. You know, maybe he left because... Stop, I snapped. But Carmen didn't wait for Brielle to finish. Her breath hitched, her lip trembled, and then without warning, without a single word, she turned and bolted down the hallway. People looked up as she passed, startled, confused, curious, but she didn't care. She just ran. I didn't hesitate. I ran after her. Carmen, wait. Her footsteps echoed ahead of me, sharp and lonely against the tile. She sprinted past the science rooms, past the vending machines, past the trophy case where the basketball team's faces smiled down like nothing bad ever happened in this school. By the time I caught up, she had made it into the back stairwell, the quietest place in the whole building, always smelling faintly of dust and old paint. She stopped halfway up the stairs, bracing herself against the railing with one hand. Her breathing was uneven, her shoulders shook. Carmen, I said gently, stepping closer. Hey, look at me. She didn't, not at first. She wiped at her eyes angrily as if the tears betrayed her. Carmen hated crying more than anything, not because she was weak, but because she'd spent so long being told not to break, not to need help, not to feel. It's fine, she choked out, voice cracking. I don't care what they say. You do, I said softly, and it's okay that you do. She finally looked up, and the hurt there was deeper than the hallway scene alone could have caused. It was years of things people didn't know, didn't see, didn't understand. It's not just the outfit, she whispered, or the chainmail, or whatever else. They don't know anything, they think they do, but they don't know a thing. I know, I said. For a moment, she just breathed, in and out, slow, unsteady. Then she stepped back and sank onto the stair, pulling her knees up, hiding her face behind her arms. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm just tired of everything." I sat down beside her, not touching, just close enough that she would know she wasn't alone. We stayed like that for a long moment, long enough for her breathing to calm, long enough for her trembling to stop. When she finally lifted her head again, her eyes were red but focused. "Let's skip gym," I said quietly. She nodded. Neither of us knew it then, but this moment, this exact moment, was one of the last breaths of normalcy either of us would ever have. Because 2 days later, everything would change. And none of us would be the same. The day before the incident began quietly, almost suspiciously quiet, in hindsight. The air was cold enough for our breath to fog, and the sky hung low like it hadn't slept well. Most students dragged their feet across the front walkway of Crook School, muttering complaints about homework or the weather. But I was awake long before most people even left their houses. My nerves had been on edge ever since the day before, after the stairwell, after watching Carmen crumble in a way I hadn't seen before. Still, when I saw her small figure approaching the school gates, head down, backpack slung over one shoulder, I felt that small flicker of relief I always felt when we met in the morning. Our meetups had become a routine, unspoken but solid. Every morning before classes, we would lean against the crooked brick wall near the bike racks, hence the nickname, talk before the rest of the world woke up enough to bother us. Carmen spotted me and lifted a hand in a half wave. Her smile was small, tired, but real. I took that as a victory. "Hey," she said quietly as she reached me. "Sorry if I kept you waiting." "You're exactly on time," I told her. "I was early, as usual." She snorted. "Nerd." I shrugged. "Only for you." She laughed at that, a gentle sound that buzzed warm in the chilly air. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine, one of those rare laughs where the whole world seemed to pause and take notice. We settled into our usual spot against the wall, and I let her talk. Carmen talking was one of my favorite parts of the day, not because her life was easy, far from it, but because for a few minutes every morning, she forgot how heavy everything was. She talked about the things she actually loved, the small sparks that kept her going. "So," I said, nudging her, "tell me something good." She drew in a breath, and her face softened. "Okay, you know the horror podcast I like? The one with the weird narrator who sounds like he's telling bedtime stories for demons." "Unfortunately, yes." "Well," she continued, ignoring the jab, "they uploaded a new episode last night, and it's long, long, and it's about abandoned buildings and ghosts that don't know they're dead. I listened to the whole thing before bed." I smiled. "Let me guess, you slept great." She nodded proudly, like a corpse. "Comforting." Carmen shrugged, pulling her sleeves over her hands. I don't know. It makes me feel like the world isn't as boring as people pretend it is." I looked at her for a moment. The way her hair fell slightly into her eyes, the way her voice calmed when she talked about things that sparked her curiosity. She had a mind full of shadows and stories and questions, and she never apologized for it. That was something I admired. She continued rambling, hopping from topic to topic like she always did. A book she'd found at the library that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, a drawing she'd made of a monster she dreamed about, the new chainmail idea she was planning, not a threatening one, just something funny to confuse people. I listened, I always did. But halfway through a story about a cryptid sighting she swore was real, I noticed Carmen's voice trail off. The light dimmed in her eyes before I even turned to look behind us. That sinking feeling hit my stomach a moment later. Of course. The 3 girls. Brielle, Alyssa, and Maddie approached us like a slow-moving shadow, all smug smiles and swinging ponytails. They never walked anywhere. They arrived, like entering a spotlight. Well, Brielle said, eyes glinting with the sharpness of a blade. "If it isn't Ghost Girl and her, whatever you are." Carmen stiffened next to me. She didn't look at them, but her hands curled within her sleeves. Alyssa crossed her arms. "Did you sleep in those clothes, Carmen? Or did the laundry machine run away in fear again?" Maddie giggled like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Carmen didn't answer. She stared at the ground, jaw clenched. I stepped slightly closer to her, but Brielle kept talking. "I heard you sent out another one of those creepy emails yesterday," Brielle said. "Seriously, do you not have anything better to do? Oh, wait, right, you don't." Carmen's shoulders dropped, just slightly, like someone had pushed on them. Alyssa leaned forward. Maybe she thinks she's smart enough to scare people. Maddie chimed in. "Yeah, good luck with that. You can't even pass a quiz without guessing." Carmen's breath caught, a small, fragile sound. Brielle looked her over slowly, curling her lip like she'd found something rotten. "Honestly, you should thank us. At least we pay attention to you. Otherwise, you'd be invisible." Carmen swallowed hard. "And don't get me started on the family drama," Brielle added with a cruel smile. "Your mom probably forgot you even exist by now." "Enough," I snapped. They all looked at me, momentarily surprised. I stepped forward, placing myself between them and Carmen. "Leave her alone," I said firmly. "Right now." Brielle's expression shifted, but not in the way I hoped. She smiled, slow, satisfied. "Aw, look," she said. "He's protective." Alyssa rolled her eyes. Maddie whispered something behind her hand, and they all laughed. Then Brielle leaned, in just a little, voice dropping low. "You won't always be around to save her." Something cold slid down my spine. But before I could answer, before Carmen could breathe, Brielle flipped her hair, signaled the others, and the three of them strutted off toward the main doors like nothing had happened. The silence they left behind felt heavier than their words. Carmen stood beside me, still staring at the ground. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy but determined. "We should go," she whispered. So we did. Neither of us knew that tomorrow, just one day later, the cracks would finally break open. And everything would change. We left the computer store just as the sun dipped behind the strip mall roofs, turning all the windows into slabs of red gold. Carmen had spent nearly half an hour running her fingers along the keyboards, pressing single keys like she was listening for a heartbeat inside each machine. I thought she was just excited about the new models, but something in her eyes, something slightly distant, made me wonder if she was searching for something else entirely. I didn't tell her I'd already bought the computer she lingered on the most. The cashier had boxed it and slipped it into a plain brown bag while she wandered toward the old printers near the back. The plan was simple: store it at my place, wrap it in something nice, and give it to her on her birthday next month. I imagined her reaction, her face lighting up, her usual quiet smile stretching wide. Carmen didn't get surprised often, but when she did, it was like seeing a rare star fall. But that never happened. You already know why. The walk home from the store was quiet at first. Not awkward quiet, more like she was listening to something only she could hear. She kept glancing over her shoulder, quick little flicks of her head like she expected someone to be trailing us. When I asked if everything was okay, she nodded, but the nod was too slow, too mechanical. "Just thinking," she murmured. "About what?" She hesitated. "About how people leave things behind. Digital things, little traces." She tapped one of her shirt buttons, though there was nothing there but thread. "Computers remember more than people think." I laughed a little, trying to keep the mood light. "Yeah, well, you practically live in the computer lab. I'm sure you've seen enough browser histories to write a whole book." She didn't laugh, she just kept walking. We passed the underpass near the park, our usual route, and that's when she stopped completely, dead in her tracks. The suddenness made me take 3 extra steps before I realized she was no longer at my side. "Carmen." She stared into the shadows under the concrete structure, her breathing shallow. A thin wind whistled through the tunnel, carrying old leaves and the metallic tang of water pooling somewhere unseen. For a second, I thought she'd spotted an animal, maybe a stray dog or one of those raccoons that liked to raid the trash bins. Instead, she whispered, "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" She didn't answer, but her hand slowly lifted, pointing into the darkness as though she expected someone to walk out. I listened harder. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, the echo of something like a drip. A slow, rhythmic plink, 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 like water falling into a metal bowl. It's just a pipe leak, I said. No, her voice cracked in a strange way, soft but strained. That's not water. Right then, before I had the chance to question her, she turned away from the underpass and continued walking, faster now. I had to jog a couple steps to catch up. You're freaking me out, I said, half joking, half honest. I'm sorry, she murmured. Sometimes it feels like something following me, not a person, more like the past. I wanted to ask her more. I wanted to dig deeper into whatever strange fear was eating at her. But she was already shifting the conversation, asking me about homework, then about whether I'd seen the poster for the school play auditions. It was like she was pulling a curtain closed, keeping me from looking any further. By the time we reached her street, the sky had turned a deep violet, the kind that makes every street lamp glow twice as bright. Her house sat at the end of the block, dark except for a single porch light that flickered every few seconds. She stopped at the gate and faced me. Thanks for walking with me. You say that like I don't do it every day. Yeah, but today feels different. I opened my mouth to ask why, what she meant, what she wasn't telling me, but she stepped backward through the gate, forcing the question to die on my tongue. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. The words were simple, ordinary, something she'd said 100 times before. But this one time, they felt wrong, heavy, final. She closed the gate gently behind her and started toward her front door. Halfway up the walkway, she paused again. I couldn't see her face well in the dim light, but her shoulders stiffened like she'd heard something right behind her. I thought she might turn around, maybe say something else, maybe tell me what had been haunting her all evening. Instead, she just hurried inside without another word. The porch light flickered once more bright, then dim, then steady. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I saw her alive. I walked the rest of the way home, replaying the entire afternoon in my head, from the computer store to the underpass to her strange, half-whispered warnings about people leaving things behind. Traces, memories. I told myself she was just tired, or stressed, or overthinking like she sometimes did. But deep down, a small part of me knew something was wrong. Something was coming. And tomorrow would be the worst day of my life. The next morning felt strangely ordinary, too ordinary, like the world was trying to pretend nothing was wrong. I got to school a little earlier than usual, mostly because I hadn't slept much. My brain kept replaying Carmen's face under that flickering porch light, her voice about things following her, her sudden tension at the underpass. But when I saw her standing in front of the school gates, all of that seemed to dissolve into the cold morning air. She was leaning against one of the bike racks, hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. When she noticed me, she straightened and gave that small, quiet smile of hers, the one that never showed teeth but somehow still felt warm. You're early, she said. So are you. I couldn't sleep, she admitted softly. Thought I might as well come here. Same, I said, though I didn't tell her why. The courtyard around us buzzed with the usual morning noise, lockers slamming, laughter echoing from clusters of friends, the hum of early gossip circling through the groups that always gathered by the steps. It was all normal, completely normal. But standing there with her, something about the day felt stretched thin, like the air was holding its breath. We started talking about random things, homework, the new vending machine that broke on the first day they installed it, the teacher who always parked crooked. Her voice was steady, clear, not at all like the nervous whisper she'd had the night before. It almost made me believe I'd imagined the whole thing. There was no sign of the three girls. Normally, they made their presence known, loudly. They'd hover near the flagpole or sit on the brick ledge near the office doors, laughing in ways that weren't really laughs but sharp snaps meant to draw attention. But today, the area where they usually stood was empty. I kept glancing around without meaning to. Carmen noticed. They're not here, she said quietly, reading my mind like she sometimes did. I know, just weird. They're always early. Maybe they stayed home, she shrugged. People do that sometimes. The way she said it felt almost rehearsed, like she'd already thought through the explanation and picked the least suspicious one. Before I could ask, she nudged my arm with her shoulder, a gentle shove meant to redirect the mood. "Anyway," she said, "tell me something interesting." "Interesting? I don't know if anything about me qualifies." "Try," she insisted. Her eyes were bright, almost playful, like she was really trying to keep the morning normal. So I played along. I told her a stupid story about how my neighbor's cat broke into our garage again and got stuck inside a cooler. She laughed, not loudly, but the kind of laugh that made her cover her mouth and wrinkle her nose. It was the most normal I'd seen her in days. We kept talking like that, light, easy, almost carefree. People brushed past us on their way into the building, some nodding, some ignoring us completely. A couple of teachers walked by with coffee cups and piles of papers tucked under their arms. The sky above was cloudy but not dark, the kind of sky that promised a quiet day. We must have talked for 20 minutes straight, which was rare. Usually Carmen was the quiet one between us, listening more than speaking, drifting through conversations like she was half somewhere else. But today she stayed with me, present, steady, almost determined. At one point, she looked toward the school doors and said, "It's weird, right? How some days feel heavier than others." "Heavy how?" "Like," she paused, trying to find the words. "Like the air is telling you something, like it's waiting." I frowned. Waiting for what? She shook her head. "I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe I'm just being dramatic." I didn't push. Even when she sounded strange, I tried not to pry too hard. For as long as I'd known her, Carmen had carried pieces of herself like fragile glass, visible, but only if you looked closely. A group of freshmen ran past us, laughing at something on one of their phones. The bell wasn't ringing yet, but the courtyard was thinning as more students filtered inside. I looked at her again. "You seem better today," I said. "I mean, not like last night." Her gaze dropped for a moment and she exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I'm okay. I think being around people helps. Being around you helps." That caught me off guard more than it should have. "Well, good," I said, suddenly awkward. She bumped my shoulder again, like she could sense my flustered silence. "Relax, it's not a confession or something." I wasn't assuming. She laughed again, softer this time. "I know." The warning bell finally rang, short and sharp, echoing off the brick walls. Conversations around us broke apart as everyone started moving toward the double doors. Backpacks swung, footsteps hurried, the usual chaos of students trying not to get marked late. Carmen didn't move right away. Instead, she stood there, staring at the entrance as though it was the mouth of something vast and unknown. I waited quietly until she finally turned back to me. "Walk with me to homeroom," she asked. "Always." We fell into step together, weaving through the last of the stragglers. Her shoulder brushed mine every few feet, a calm, grounding presence. Inside the building, the hallways buzzed with the usual mix of morning energy, slamming lockers, teachers calling out reminders, the echo of sneakers squeaking against the waxed floor. It all felt normal. Too normal. As we turned down the hallway toward our homeroom, I caught her glancing over her shoulder again, just like she had the night before at the underpass. Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear, but she forced a small smile when she saw me looking. "It's nothing," she said. And even though I didn't believe that at all, I nodded. Because at that moment, with the bell ringing again overhead and the hallway filling to capacity, it was easier to pretend that today would go like any other day. Easier to pretend nothing waited beneath the surface. Easier to pretend nothing was coming. By the time 11 o'clock rolled around, the air in our classroom felt thick and stale, like it had been sealed shut for hours. Everyone was hunched over their desks, pencils scratching, test papers rustling just barely. No talking, no whispering, only the sound of awkward breathing and the occasional nervous throat clear. It was one of those tests where even the walls felt tense. Carmen sat one row ahead of me, slightly to the left. I could see the edge of her hair where it brushed her shoulder, the way she sometimes tapped her pencil twice before writing an answer. She usually worked quickly, but today she moved slower, more deliberately, like she was trying to concentrate through static no one else could hear. I kept glancing at the clock, not because the test was hard, but because something about the silence made me restless. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just outside the door, something I couldn't name. Halfway through a question about geometric proofs, the loudest, sharpest fire alarm I'd ever heard exploded through the classroom. Everyone jerked in their seats. A couple of people dropped their pencils. The siren wailed high and metallic, echoing off the ceiling tiles. The red light near the door began to strobe, flashing white red like a heartbeat gone wrong. "All right, everyone, line up," our teacher said, raising his voice over the alarm. "Leave your tests on your desks. Calmly, calmly." Calmly, yeah, that was a joke. The room instantly filled with nervous chatter, desks scraping as everyone rushed to stand. I tried to stay close to Carmen, but the hallway outside was already overflowing with students pouring out of other classrooms, like someone had shaken loose a massive beehive. The whole building vibrated with footsteps and the shrill blast of the alarm. "This isn't a drill," someone said. "It probably is," someone else answered. "Doesn't feel like one," another muttered. The crowd thickened as we moved down the hall in a slow, shoving wave. Hands bumped shoulders, backpacks swung, kids shuffled too close together. I stuck a hand out, trying to keep sight of Carmen in front of me, but a surge from behind shoved me sideways, and she disappeared behind a cluster of students from another class. "Carmen," I called, but my voice was swallowed by the noise. The crowd pushed us toward the east exit, the one by the cafeteria. I craned my neck, searching for her above the chaos, but the crush of bodies kept shifting, blocking my view. For a moment, panic rose up like a spark catching flame. But then, by some miracle, I spotted her a few feet ahead near the double doors, turning her head left and right, clearly searching for me too. Her eyes locked onto mine, and relief washed across her face. I pushed forward, squeezing between two juniors, debating whether they should have left their bags. Sorry, move. Finally, I broke through the cluster and reached her. "There you are," I said, trying to catch my breath. "You disappeared," she said, gripping her sleeve like she was trying not to show how anxious she'd been. "You disappeared first," I teased, though a nervous laugh twisted inside it. The doors swung open, letting out a flood of students into the bright midday sun. The alarm continued to blare inside the building, but out here it sounded muffled, distant, like it belonged to another world. "Front field?" I asked. Carmen shook her head. "Too crowded." It wasn't unusual for us to stick together during fire drills, sometimes drifting away from the main group. We weren't breaking any rules, not really. Students always spread out once they reached the field, and after the strange feeling in the halls, to be packed shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of kids. So when she tugged my sleeve and nodded toward the side path, I followed without question. We slipped away from the mass of students heading toward the football field and circled along the side of the school, where overgrown hedges brushed against the brick walls and the concrete walkway cracked in long, thin lines. The further we went, the quieter it got. The screams of the alarm faded under the steady hum of wind and rustling leaves. "You okay?" I asked as we walked. Carmen looked straight ahead. "Yeah, just hate crowds, you know that." I did know, but there was more to it. Something behind her eyes, something restless and wary, told me she was holding back. We rounded the corner toward the back of the school, the place where the property line dipped into a patch of trees before opening onto the staff parking lot. It was quieter here, always quieter. No teachers patrolled this side during drills, no students hung out here during lunch. It was the kind of place where things could happen unseen. The kind of place where we first met them. And there they were. The three girls. Standing just beyond the edge of shade thrown by the tall elm trees, their arms crossed, their expressions twisted into that same familiar smirk I'd seen 100 times. They leaned against the low retaining wall like they'd been waiting there the whole time, like they knew we'd show up eventually. Beside them stood their boyfriends, 3 guys from the grade above us. They had that casual arrogance older boys wore like a jacket, loose, heavy, and meant to intimidate. One had his hands stuffed in his pockets, Another was tossing a pebble into the air repeatedly. The third just stood there, jaw tight, eyes sharp. Carmen froze the moment she saw them. Of course she did. Because this was where everything had started months ago, here behind the school when we'd accidentally crossed into their territory without knowing it. They decided then that Carmen was an easy target. Quiet, small, different. They'd chosen her the way predators choose prey, by convenience, not conscience. And here they were again, like ghosts who refused to stay buried. "We should go back," I whispered. Carmen didn't respond. Her shoulders stiffened, her breath catching in that way I recognized instantly. Silent panic, held tightly behind her ribs. One of the girls, Heather, the ringleader, noticed us first. Her lips curved upward in a slow, satisfied smile. "Well, well," she said loudly, pushing off the wall. "Look who wandered back here." The others turned, smirking, whispering something to their boyfriends that made them all laugh under their breath. Carmen took a step back. I stepped forward. "We should go," I repeated, this time louder. Heather tilted her head, eyes gleaming with something mean. "Why, we're just saying hi." "Yeah," another girl chimed in. "It's a fire drill. Everyone's out here, no big deal." They weren't yelling. They didn't need to. Their voices carried the kind of cold confidence that made the air feel thinner, sharper. Carmen's fingers brushed mine, small, hesitant, seeking something to hold on to. "It's fine," she whispered. "Let's just leave." But even as she said it, the three girls and their boyfriends shifted slightly, spreading out just enough to block the narrow path behind us. My pulse thudded in my ears. The fire alarm continued to wail faintly in the distance. The wind rustled through the trees. And the seven of them stared at us with slow, deliberate smiles. We were cornered. Not physically, yet, but something in the air felt like it was tightening, drawing closer, preparing. The moment hung there, heavy and electric, as though the world itself was bracing for what was about to come next. But it hadn't happened yet. Not yet. Everything happened so fast, I barely had time to breathe. 1 second, Carmen and I were standing there, surrounded, and the next the three boyfriends surged forward like they'd been waiting for some signal only they could hear. All three lunged at me at once, hands grabbing my arms, shoulders slamming into my chest. The impact knocked every bit of air out of my lungs and sent me crashing backward onto the dirt. My knees hit the ground hard. Fingers dug into my shoulders from behind, forcing me forward until I was almost bowing. Another hand grabbed the back of my jacket, yanking me upright again and shoving me down so violently my vision blurred for a second. The sound of their breathing, the angry, heavy snorts of effort, filled my ears. Dirt scraped into my palms. My heartbeat hammered so loudly it felt like it was echoing up my throat. "Stay down," one of them growled. I tried to twist free, but their grip clamped around my arms like steel bands. Someone shoved my head downward so hard my chin nearly hit my chest. I could only see the ground beneath me, brown patches of grass, scattered bits of gravel, a crushed soda can a few inches from my hand. But I could hear Carmen. The girls moved toward her, not charging all at once like the boys had, but spreading out, circling. The first one, Heather, of course, stepped forward with a grin that never reached her eyes. She swung her arm, aiming a punch straight for Carmen's face. But Carmen wasn't there anymore. She moved so sharply it looked like she'd stepped out of her own shadow. Heather's punch sliced through empty air, and Carmen's counter came instantly, her fist cracking against the girl's cheekbone with a sickening thud. Heather's head snapped back and she stumbled, then fell flat onto the ground with a gasp. "Get her," one of the other girls shouted. The second girl rushed Carmen from the side. Carmen didn't hesitate. She spun, catching her attacker under the arm and lifting her. A full lift, something I didn't think Carmen had the strength for. But adrenaline gave her power. With a tight, furious exhale, Carmen twisted her body and slammed the girl to the ground. The impact made the dirt shudder beneath my knees. For a moment, shock froze the world. Even the boys holding me seemed stunned. Carmen stood there, chest rising and falling fast, her fists clenched, her eyes sharp and terrified all at once. but the third girl had been behind her. "Carmen!" I tried to shout, but one of the boys clamped a hand over my mouth. The third girl launched herself forward, tackling Carmen hard from behind. The force knocked Carmen off her feet. They hit the ground in a tangled blur of arms and legs, rolling through dirt and dried leaves. The girl scrambled upright first, her face twisted with rage. She grabbed a fistful of Carmen's hoodie and yanked her completely off the ground. Carmen kicked, trying to get leverage, but the girl shook her like she weighed nothing. "You need a bath," the girl hissed, her voice venomous and triumphant. My stomach dropped. "No," I tried to scream through the hand over my mouth. The girl turned her head toward the open manhole near the edge of the maintenance shed. Rusted metal cover pushed aside, blackness yawning beneath it like a hungry throat. And then, she threw her. It wasn't a push. It wasn't some small shove. She threw Carmen with everything she had. Carmen's body arced through the air for one awful second, arms flailing, fingers reaching for something to hold on to. And then she disappeared into the darkness. A hollow, echoing sound rose up from below. My breath vanished. My mind went blank. Everything inside me collapsed inward, like someone had punched a hole in my chest. The boys let go all at once. I fell forward onto my hands, stunned. Dirt smeared across my palms. My elbows shook so badly I could barely support my weight. Something snapped inside me, something cold, sharp, unbearable. A sound came out of my throat, but it wasn't a scream or a shout. It was something raw and painful, like my body trying to reject what it had just seen. Tears blurred my vision almost instantly. Hot, fast, uncontrollable. Heather was groaning on the ground. The other girl Carmen slammed was still trying to sit up, dazed and furious. The third girl who threw her was breathing hard, like she was only just realizing what she'd done. The boys stood frozen, no longer mocking, no longer laughing, their faces pale and unsettled. We all heard it at the same time. Footsteps. Fast, heavy footsteps coming closer from around the side of the building. The faint jingle of keys. A teacher's voice calling out something we couldn't quite make out. Panic swept through the group of them like a cold wind. They looked at each other, all traces of smugness gone. Their expressions morphed into fear, real fear. "We have to go," one of the boys whispered harshly. "Now." Footsteps grew louder, closer. They ran. All of them. The girls stumbled to their feet and sprinted toward the back gate. The boyfriends followed, shoving past them, tripping over roots and broken pavement. One of them yelled, "Go, go, go!" as they disappeared into the line of trees. But I didn't run. I couldn't. I pushed myself up on trembling legs, tears streaking down my face. My throat felt like it was closing in on itself. My chest ached so badly I couldn't breathe right. The world around me seemed to pulse, the edges blurring. The teacher rounded the corner. I didn't think, I just reacted. I ran straight toward him, nearly crashing into him. My voice broke the moment I opened my mouth. "They pushed her," I yelled. "They pushed her." The teacher froze, confusion and alarm flashing across his face. But I kept yelling, kept trying to explain through the sobs, through the shaking, through the sheer panic gripping my whole body. "They pushed her. They pushed Carmen." My words echoed off the brick walls, loud enough to drown out the last faint echoes of the fire alarm. The teacher was still speaking, something about staying calm, something about calling for help, but his words blurred into meaningless noise. My ears were ringing, my heartbeat drumming so violently in my head that it drowned out everything else. I stumbled away from him, toward the spot where the manhole yawned open like the mouth of something ancient and hungry. I didn't want to look. Every part of me, every instinct screamed to turn away, to run, to erase the last 5 minutes from my memory. But something inside pulled me forward anyway, like a thread tied tight around my ribs. My legs moved on their own, stiff and trembling. When I reached the edge, I grabbed the rim with shaking hands. The cold metal stung my palms. I forced myself to look down. The darkness swallowed most of the tunnel. but there was just enough light pouring in from above to show enough. Just enough. Just enough for my face to drain of every trace of color. Enough for my throat to constrict until I couldn't breathe. Enough for something deep in my chest to twist brutally, like someone had reached inside and wrung my heart out with both hands. Her body lay in the shallow water far below, unnaturally still. Her neck was bent at an angle no neck should ever bend, wrong in a way that made my stomach lurch violently. And her face. God. Half of it was missing from the way she'd struck the concrete wall. Not gore, not blood, just absence. A hollow place where a smile should have been. A blank, terrible silence carved into the person I had walked to school with only hours ago. That image seared into me, burned into my mind with a permanence I knew would never fade. I staggered backward so hard I nearly fell. My breath came in sharp, broken gasps. No, 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 no. I kept whispering, my voice shaking so badly it barely sounded like me. The teacher called my name again, louder, more frantic. Someone else was running toward us. I didn't wait to see who. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran. My legs moved like they were on fire, carrying me across the back lot, across the side of the school, straight through the courtyard without seeing a single face around me. Students stared as I tore past them, but none of it mattered. My lungs burned, tears blurred everything, and the world felt shattered, broken, wrong. I didn't stop running until my feet hit pavement blocks I recognized, the sidewalk near my house. My chest felt tight, my vision swimming. The moment I fumbled my key into the lock and shoved open my front door, my knees nearly gave out. I slammed the door behind me. Silence. The house felt too quiet, too still, like even the air inside was holding its breath. I pressed my back against the door and slid to the floor. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my whole body trembling with a panic so deep it felt like it was carved into my bones. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. Carmen! Her name broke out of me in a whisper, thin and cracked. I staggered to my feet, still sobbing, and stumbled into my room. It looked exactly the same as it had that morning, bed unmade, backpack on the floor, papers scattered on my desk. And right above my desk, taped carefully to the pale wall, hung the photograph of us. The one from early fall, when the air was crisp and the trees burned gold. Carmen was smiling, really smiling, her eyes bright, her hair blowing just enough to look like she was laughing at the breeze. I had my arm around her shoulders, awkward and shy, but she leaned into me with this soft familiarity that always made me feel grounded. Looking at it now, it hurt. It hurt in a way nothing had ever hurt before. My breath hitched, and I pressed my fist to my mouth to stop the sound that tried to claw its way out. I reached toward the picture with trembling fingers, tracing the outline of her face, the whole face she had that day, the face I remembered, the face that should have still been here. The face that wasn't anymore. A sharp, sick wave washed over me. I backed away from the wall, stumbling. Then I saw the computer sitting on my desk. The one I'd bought for her. The one she had admired in the store. The one meant for her birthday next month, a birthday she would never reach now. Its box sat there, sealed, with the receipt tucked neatly under the edge. A gift waiting for someone who no longer existed in the world above the manhole. My throat closed, the room tilted. I pressed both hands to my face, trying to hold myself together. But I couldn't. The grief hit all at once, like a collapsing building, like a tidal wave, like something enormous and unstoppable crashing down on me so violently that it took every bit of breath from my lungs. I slid to the floor, curling into myself, rocking back and forth as the sobs tore out of me. For minutes, maybe hours, I didn't move. The world blurred into nothing but pain and shaking, and the echo of the image burned behind my eyelids. Carmen's smile in the photo. Carmen's body in the dark. Two realities too far apart to reconcile. Two versions of the same girl. One alive, one not. And all I could do was sit there on my bedroom floor, gasping for air that refused to fill my lungs, wishing that somehow, even for a second, I could undo what had happened. But I couldn't, and the silence of my room swallowed me whole. They pronounced her dead at the scene. Those words echoed through every hallway of my mind for days, soft at first, then louder, heavier, until they were all I could think about. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. Everything felt drained of color, like the world had been washed in cold, gray water. When they announced the date of her funeral, something inside me cracked again. It made everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. The church was small, old, with stained glass windows that caught morning light in blues and reds. People filled the pews, teachers, students, neighbors, people who never noticed Carmen until she was gone. Their whispers drifted together into a low hum, like a storm building far away. I sat in the front row with my hands shaking in my lap. My clothes felt too tight, my breathing too shallow. Every time I blinked, I saw the picture of her that rested on an easel by the coffin. The one where she wore her favorite hoodie, the one she'd drawn on with marker. She was smiling in that picture, soft and small, like she didn't know she was being photographed. Her coffin sat in front of it, simple, smooth, dark wood. Flowers lined the sides, white roses, purple lilies. The scent was heavy, almost suffocating. I kept staring at the grain of the wood, at the way the sunlight from the stained glass brushed over it. Inside that box was my friend. My best friend. The only person who made school feel less like a maze. My throat tightened so hard I thought I might choke. When the pastor finally called my name for the eulogy, my body moved on its own. I stood slowly, almost mechanically, like I wasn't connected to myself. My knees wobbled. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I walked toward the front where the microphone waited, but I didn't reach for it yet. Instead, I carried the box. Her computer. The one I'd bought for her birthday. The one I never got the chance to give. The one that should have made her smile. I placed it gently on top of her coffin. The bow I had tied on it that morning trembled. From the movement, a small, pointless touch of celebration in a place filled with grief. Then I reached into my pocket and took out the paper I'd printed earlier, a copy of one of her chainmail posts, the one she always joked about, the one she'd teased me for laughing at. "Send this or bad luck will follow," it said across the top in bold letters. Classic Carmen humor, half serious, half sarcastic. I laid it next to the computer. And then I turned toward the crowd. Dozens of faces stared back at me, some crying, some expressionless, some pretending to care, some genuinely devastated. Their eyes pressed on me like a weight I wasn't prepared for. I opened my mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Not one word. Every sentence I'd written last night, the ones I practiced in my room over and over, vanished. My throat felt cemented shut. My breath hitched in short, painful bursts. Behind me, the coffin loomed like a wall I couldn't climb over. I tried again. Still nothing. The silence stretched on, long and fragile. It cracked something deep inside me. My eyes burned and a hot tear slid down my face before I could stop it. Then another. And another. My fingers clenched around the edge of the podium until my knuckles burned white. I tried again, but the word broke midair. Someone sniffled in the third row. Someone else whispered, "Poor kid." But none of it reached me. All I could focus on was the coffin. The fact that she was there. That she wasn't beside me anymore. That her voice, her soft laugh, her quiet comments, her gentle sarcasm was gone. Gone. My lips trembled, and the paper with my speech slid from my hands onto the floor. I didn't even pick it up. The words I had written suddenly felt useless, empty, meaningless. What could I possibly say? What words could make sense of what happened? What sentence could bring her back? My shoulders shook. My breathing faltered. I pressed my palm against my eyes, trying to hold myself together, but the tears kept falling, slow, steady, unstoppable. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely audible. I'm so sorry." I didn't know who I was apologizing to. Maybe to her. Maybe to myself. Maybe to the world for failing her. The pastor gently stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's all right," he murmured. "You've said enough." but I hadn't said anything. And maybe that was the point. Sometimes grief is too big for language. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any words could. I stepped back from the podium, wiping my face with my sleeve, and returned to my seat. The computer and the chainmail printout rested atop her coffin, small pieces of a life cut brutally short. They looked wrong there, but they were hers, and I wanted her to have them. As the next speaker walked up, I stared at the coffin again, praying she knew somehow that I tried, that I cared, that I would have done anything to save her, even though it hadn't been enough. A couple years passed. People said it would get easier, that grief fades, that memories soften and the sharp edges dull, but they were wrong. Carmen never faded. Her voice lingered in my thoughts, her laugh echoed in places it had no right to, and every time I walked past the old computer sitting on my desk, the one I put on her coffin but couldn't bring myself to bury, I felt her absence like a bruise I kept pressing on. Life kept moving, though. Classes changed, people graduated, rumors grew old. Even the girls who killed her drifted back into the crowd, protected by the lie everyone had agreed to swallow. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. It was late one night when my phone buzzed. I was lying in bed, lights off, staring at the ceiling like I did most nights. The vibration startled me. At first I thought it was some random notification. Then I saw the name. One of them. One of the girls. My stomach twisted. My chest tightened. Why would she message me after all these years? Why now? I opened it. It wasn't a text. It was an audio file. Just seeing the waveform made something inside me go cold. I hesitated, thumb hovering above the play button, every instinct telling me not to press it. But curiosity, or fear, or maybe the same ache that never left me since that day, something made me hit play. A girl's voice spilled into the dark. Creepy, echoing, too calm, too steady, almost robotic, but with a strange wetness behind it, like the words were dragging through water. My name is Carmen Winstead. I froze. At first I thought it was a sick joke, a twisted prank, something the girls sent just to haunt me all over again. But then the voice continued. I'm 17 years old. I'm very similar to you. Did I mention to you that I'm dead? The room around me seemed to shrink. The air felt thick, heavy, impossible to swallow. My throat tightened as the voice kept going, calm and steady like she was telling a bedtime story. A few years ago, a group of girls pushed me down a sewer hole to try and embarrass me. When I didn't come back up, the police came. The girls said I had fallen, and everyone believed them. My hands trembled. The police found my body in the sewer. I had a broken neck and my face was torn off. I flinched, even though I had seen her, seen enough to be haunted by it forever. Hearing the words spoken aloud, in a voice that sounded like her, felt like being pulled underwater. The message continued with the stories. David laughing and deleting it. David hearing her laughter in the shower. David's blood writing that message on the wall. Then Charlotte, the girl who forwarded it to 25 people and was spared. The voice stayed cold, unblinking, detached, like something that remembered being human but wasn't anymore. Send this to 15 people in the next 5 minutes if you don't want your fate to be the same as David's. Your time starts now. The story is true. You can research it on Google. The audio clicked off. Silence ate the room. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the screen. My reflection looked pale and distorted in the black glass. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. My hands were cold enough to sting. I didn't send it. I didn't move at all. I just listened to the echo of her voice looping in my head. That wet, echoing tone, that calm certainty. My name is Carmen Winstead. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears that came from somewhere deeper than fear. Because if it really was her, if something of her still lingered in this world, then her voice shouldn't have sounded like that. She deserved better. My phone buzzed again. I jumped. A small gasp escaped me. Another message. From the same number. The preview text read only 4 words. This one is for you. My fingers shook as I tapped it open. It was a short message this time. Just one sentence. Typed, not spoken, and somehow that made it feel more real. You're safe. You were the only one who cared about me. My breath caught. The room felt suddenly warmer, softer, almost familiar. Like she was standing somewhere just behind me. Not angry, not vengeful. Just there. And for the first time in years, I whispered her name out loud. Carmen. The phone didn't buzz again. But something in the silence felt different. Like she heard me. Like she was listening. Like she never really left. Days went by after the message. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that Carmen's second text was the last thing I'd ever get from her. That maybe, somehow, she had reached out only to protect me, to reassure me, and then slipped back into whatever place she existed now. But she stayed in my thoughts. The sound of her voice from the chainmail message replayed without permission, echoing at the back of my mind like footsteps in an empty hallway. I'd catch myself staring at the corners of my room at night, expecting something to shift in the shadows. Nothing did. Not at first. Then, 3 days later, everything changed. It was early morning, barely past sunrise, when my phone buzzed on my nightstand. I ignored it at first, too tired to move. But it kept vibrating, one notification after another nonstop. When I finally rolled over and grabbed it, I saw dozens of alerts. Breaking news. Multiple bodies discovered. City police investigating manhole-related deaths. Authorities say details are disturbing. My blood ran cold. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and tapped the first headline. The article loaded slowly, like the phone itself hesitated to show me. When it finally appeared, the words felt unreal, surreal, like something from a nightmare I hadn't woken from. Early this morning, several bodies were discovered in different manholes across the city. I stopped reading for a moment, breath catching in my throat. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in. I forced myself to continue. Authorities say the victims appear to have been taken by surprise. The scenes have been described as extremely violent and unlike anything investigators have previously encountered. Police are withholding the exact condition of the bodies due to the disturbing nature of the injuries. I swallowed hard. The article continued. Patterns suggest a connection between the victims. All of them were local teens or young adults. Sources claim the circumstances are deeply concerning. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Another article was already linked at the bottom, time-stamped only minutes earlier. This one went further. Unofficial reports from first responders describe the injuries as not consistent with any normal accident and impossible to be self-inflicted. Impossible. The word stung. I knew what that meant. The pit of fear that had been growing in my stomach since the message now twisted painfully. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, so loud I barely heard my own breathing. I clicked the third headline. A source close to the investigation states that each of the manholes had been partially closed afterwards, as if someone did not want the bodies found immediately. That detail made my skin crawl. The articles kept updating. New information spilling in minute by minute. The reporters all danced around the same implication, a serial killer, something methodical, intentional, and vicious. But they didn't know Carmen. They didn't know what had happened to her. They didn't know the truth that everyone else had buried. My phone buzzed again, another alert. This one listed the victims' names. When I read the first two, I felt a jolt of cold shock rip through me so intense I almost dropped the phone. They were the boyfriends. 2 of the 3. The ones who held me down that day. The ones who watched and laughed. The ones who let it happen. I read the names again, slower, each letter burning into my mind. There was no mistake. I felt something deep inside me crack open. Fear, guilt, and a strange, hollow ache mixing into something I couldn't name. I checked for the girls' names. None were listed. Not yet. But I felt it. Somewhere beyond what the news could report. Somewhere cold and damp and deep beneath the city. Carmen was still moving. Still watching. Still remembering. More notifications poured in. People posting rumors. Blurry photos of police cars near storm drains. Someone claiming they heard a girl laughing in the early morning hours near the park. Laughing. I shut off the screen. The room felt dead silent, but inside my head everything buzzed. The air felt colder. The shadows seemed sharper than they had earlier that morning. I rubbed my arms, but the chill didn't fade. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to tell. Who would believe me? Who would even want to? Years ago, no one believed the truth about Carmen's death. They didn't believe she was pushed. They didn't believe the witnesses. They didn't believe me. And now, if I told anyone what I suspected, what I feared was really happening, they'd think I was sick, traumatized, or delusional. But deep down, beneath the shock, beneath the horror, another emotion flickered. Something like understanding. Because the day she died, when I leaned over that manhole and saw what they had done to her, what they had turned her into, I had felt something break inside me. And now, piece by piece, it felt like she was picking those pieces back up. Not for herself, but for me. For the only person who cared. And maybe, terrifying as it was, she wasn't finished yet. I've carried Carmen's story for years, dragging it behind me like a shadow that never left my side. I thought maybe telling it would make the weight lighter, maybe a little easier to breathe around. But it doesn't. It just makes it clearer, more real. Like saying every detail out loud pulls each memory out of the dark and sets it on the table where I can't look away. People always ask, what do you do now? How do you live after something like that? The truth is, I live quietly. No big crowds, no loud places. I stay away from storms, drains, anything that echoes them. And by the time you realize you should have spoken up, it's always too late. Bullying doesn't end at school. It follows you. It brands you. It changes the way you breathe, the way you trust, the way you see yourself years after the bruises fade. I know. I watched the bravest person I knew get torn down piece by piece until the day they pushed her into the dark. And the only thing worse than losing her was knowing how preventable it all was. So here I am, years later, telling this story again like it's the only thing left I can give her. I'm not asking you to believe every part of it. I'm not asking you to fear her. I'm not even asking you to send the message on. All I'm asking is this. Don't be silent. Don't be the person who watches cruelty happen and shrugs. Don't be the one who laughs along, because it's easier than standing alone. Don't be the reason someone feels erased. Stand up. Speak up. Be the person Carmen needed. Be the person someone else needs right now. Because the truth is, it wasn't a ghost that killed her. It was people. And people can do better. I guess that's the end. Not a clean ending, not a satisfying one, just the truth. What's left of it anyway? Some nights I still think I hear her laugh, soft and distant, like she's walking somewhere behind me. And maybe she is. Maybe she always will be. I don't know if that should comfort me or break me. But I do know this. I miss her. And I always will. That's all I have left.